Hello, good morning. It's Friday, the 27th of December, and the buses are back running today after a 2-day break, and so are we. Welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics.
Sorry, did we have a 2-day break? I don't remember that.
You may have overindulged on Christmas Eve in that case, Martin. Stephen isn't with us today, but obviously Martin's here, Alex is here, I'm here. And we've got 13 viewers as well already. Because we weren't sure how many people are going to be tuning in today, as it's. I mean, it isn't a bank holiday. Technically, it is a work day. How are you both?
Yeah, very well. I've had a lovely time. I'm up in Sheffield. I've been visiting my daughter for Christmas, which has been fantastic because she's a great cook. So I've had a really good time. Yeah.
Well, for once, I'm not responding saying I'm tired because last week I actually had enough time to sleep, including a few days without having the alarm. Apart from today, of course, it's just very difficult to be back at 7 a.m. But yeah, I had a great time actually, catching up on sleep and also doing some of the work on my house, which I never managed to do during work time.
Well, I thought today this actually, I was going to say because this was my birthday presents from Alice. We were going to do a sort of review of the year, and what's happened in 2024, and then look ahead to 2025. So we had the general election, we've had local elections, and then we'll talk about the sort of actual things that have happened. In terms of policy and changes, and then look ahead at what might be coming down the pike in 2025. So, Alex, any thoughts about the general election?
Well, I think everyone has at least followed the headlines, but I think this is one of the important, things politically this year. Of course, the overall result and also some of the unexpected or less expected results in our Cambridgeshire region. I would say the most surprising thing for me was actually, my friend Sam Carling winning with, was it 39 votes in Northwest Cambridgeshire, like something that I think very few people expected, commenting on Cambridgeshire politics. As well as less unexpected, but Peterborough going back to Labour again by a smaller majority, with Andrew Pakes winning back the seat for Labour. So those are, I think, my two highlights that I definitely haven't expected Northwest Cams.
Yeah, we had a couple of close results in Cambridgeshire, didn't we? So we had obviously the Peterborough one was just 118 as well. Both of them really, really close. I mean, and it's you have to take your hat off to Paul Bristow for fighting that campaign that he did. Although I think he was helped by the fact that there was a pro-Palestine vote in Peterborough as well. But even so, great result for. It's not the result he would have wanted, obviously, but you've got to take your hat off to him for coming that close.
Yeah, given how much of a swing there was against Conservatives. I mean, I think that's the story.
The big story with the general election is obviously that there are a number of seats that where the Labour won a big majority, but there's a lot of seats. There'll be a huge number of target seats next time round, because a lot were closer than you expect. And it's so in some senses, it's a big majority, but it's a big majority with a lot of small majorities underpinning it, which is going to make the next general election really interesting.
Yeah, why it's wide, but it's shallow, and it's only a small, small change in vote or national swing. All the rest of it means a lot of seats will swing back.
You've got to hope, you know, if you're a Labour supporter, you've got to hope that Keir Starmer's got his strategy right and that he's getting the pain out of the way early, because you know the way the Labour Party has become unpopular very quickly, you know, must be a concern for Labour voters, especially, you know, talking about looking ahead. You know, we've got local elections coming up in May.
I think one of the interesting things as well is like how many seats, especially the narrow majority seats, were won, like percentage wise, with much less than some of the seats that were not won as well. And I think that's like a discussion around the voting system as well, that like you can, depending on the split of the vote and depending on who is standing, you could, you know, and so many seats were won with less than 30% of the vote and narrowly, whereas in other seats, for example, like, you know, some of the reform gains as well as some of the conservative holds were, you know, Labour had perhaps a higher share but didn't win. So that's something interesting when people like were discussing like, well, but, you know, so and so go, like Great Yarmouth is a good example, you know, like with reform gaining the seat there and the Labour share compared to, let's say, some other seats where reform wasn't perhaps as strong and Labour had a higher share but didn't, you know, but won the seats. So yes, an interesting discussion for the voting system as well next year, or next election.
I still have a view that reform will pretty much collapse eventually, because they'll follow the same path as UKIP. But if they still exist in the general election, the only thing I can see, if things stay as they are, all I can see is a hung parliament. And you know, and that will mean another coalition of some sort, and what you can pull together would be interesting. But you know, it does again start to pull the argument together for voting change. And you know, it's interesting for me, more people support and move towards PR than support any individual political party. And you know, there's got to come a time where people have got to start treating it seriously, because there's a real danger that what will happen is we'll get a party like Reform come in and get some sort of power on the basis of forcing their change on the system. And the centre ground has got to bite the bullet and say, actually, this is coming. Let's embrace it and let's make it work from the centre so that we can make it work for the whole country. It's a real issue for me. It's about time somebody bit the bullet and just said, we're going to go for it. Let's start with the local elections in May next year.
Yeah, I think actually starting with local elections would be good. Okay, I know the stakes aren't as high, but I think the situation is almost worse with local elections. You know, where you have multi-member wards, it's even more disproportionate. I don't know. I do hope it happens. I mean, it would be better. It would be an improvement, but it wouldn't be a panacea. And we'd still have a lot of the problems that we have with our politics. I think if we did it, we would need the political parties to want to use it as hopefully as part of a sort of little bit of a reset of British politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, some of the stuff around sort of cleaning up politics and so on.
I mean, there's a couple of things that have been announced around that. You know, the beefing up of the standards regime is one example, and you know, sort of my view is, from my perspective, that the standards regime for councillors needed to be beefed up. But there's a concern they'll go too far, and there'll be a negative reaction because they go too far. But it's that sort of change that we do need, and it's about holding politicians to account and creating an expectation of better behaviour.
How likely do you think it is to have, you know, any change in the electoral system, the voting system in the next parliament? Because of course, like, you know, Labour, you know, pledged and is progressing with the votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, and there's this argument that part of a new democracy bill, you could put some changes in the voting system as well, part of the bigger package. But there's no, as I can see, like no move towards like, you know, PR or any form of PR or anything like that, part of this initial democracy bill discussion.
Well, for me, the starting point, the easy starting point, is to reverse the changes that Priti Patel made for combined authority mayors. And my understanding is that if they can do that at the drop of at the stroke of a pen, because it's secondary legislation. That would be the thing that makes sense to me for all sorts of reasons. I've said it before, but the idea of just the benefit of PR for something where you're voting for a single candidate, with a fair amount of power, is that with a PR system, he's going to get some sort of endorsement from 50% of the population. And that, I think, for me, that's important. And I don't like the system we've moved into. And if they're going to change it, why not do what they can do now? Is my view. But you can't criticise Angela Rayner for not doing anything, to be fair. I think this is a Home Secretary's decision, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think in a way, going back to the local elections, I think there's an even stronger argument if we move towards bigger unitaries with, like, especially if you have one member representing like a larger number of people with increased responsibility. I think there's a likelihood that elections can become even less, representative, especially because they're lower turnout and the system we have at the moment. So yeah, I think there's a difference between having, let's say, one county and like 3 district councillors in an area compared to having one unitary authority councillor representing the whole area and still having the same voting system potentially on a similar turnout. It's different.
I agree, but there's also some evidence around the country of a lot of coalition councils actually working as well. I mean, in Cambridgeshire, we've got the county council running and running happily with a system that the Conservatives said would break down and hasn't, for the last three and a half years. We've got what I see as a successful coalition in Huntingdonshire as well. And there are some up and down the country, some of which are getting a bit fractious, but they exist elsewhere. And they are, by and large, they are working and holding together. So, it does show that this principle of actually working together as in coalitions can work. And it's the thing, for me, British politics needs is a system where somewhere within it, politicians are having to work together, because it will break down some of the Yaboo stuff. Is my view, because that's the thing that's killing politics, helped by the media, to be fair. But to me, it's the ingredients, the evidence is there that actually there's something in it. And it's just about saying, actually, let's bite the bullet and do it. And I wish somebody would. And it does surprise me there's not more noise about it in the media. And the shame is, the first time there's going to be noise about it will be after the local elections, where if Reform UK do well, and then they're letting the wrong people drive it.
Yeah, speaking about reform and local elections, like quite a bit in the news this week around reform, like membership numbers discussions, obviously some by-elections they won recently, including some younger candidates as well, like appearing in politics, gaining seats for reform in a couple of by-elections. Is reform attracting younger voters and younger candidates?
There's only one person that really knows, or only a few people that really know. My suspicion is that that Kemi Badenoch shot herself in the foot yesterday with her response about reform numbers, and that reform are attracting a wider audience, and they are increasing the membership. And I can see why, because they're new, and all that's going on, and there's a bit of excitement behind that, and so I suspect they are attracting a younger audience. I suspect most of what they're attracting isn't a younger audience, but I suspect some younger people are going to be attracted to it. You can see how you can look at our political system and be attracted to something that provides an alternative. The issue is whether populism is the alternative, and I'm pretty determined it absolutely isn't. Populism just doesn't work. What you need is politicians that can stand by their own principles and do their own research, you use the resource behind them to research issues themselves, and sometimes as a result of that take tough decisions. Populism can't do that.
I mean, there's a few things there. I mean, it's exactly what you mean by populism. There's a brilliant academic called Cass Mooder who gives a definition of populism as a thin-centered ideology that argues that there's a pure people and a corrupt elite, and that politics should be a manifestation of the general will, which I think works quite well. The interesting thing is what he means by thin-centered ideology is it can be. I think politics is more of a style than a philosophy. I would say that Jeremy Corbyn was a populist, for instance.
Agreed. Yeah.
Still is.
I think the more in terms of getting to power, and I think that's an important part of it. In terms of getting to power, the more left and the more right you go, the more you tend to be populist. But what you do in the middle of that is, there's this whipping up of blame, I think is the way I put it. And as soon as you get into a party politics where ethnicity becomes a grounds for blame, that's where it gets very difficult as well. And the notion that the people are always right, isn't true. The reason you elect politicians is to use their conscience on your behalf, and sometimes politicians, especially, as I say, they've got the resource behind them. They've got the ability to actually get into the grassroots of things and properly research it. And sometimes as a result of that, you come to conclusions that others that are less well read, if you want to put it that way, won't come to. And you've got to, the population has to accept that is part of what politics is. And that's not populism.
No, it isn't. I mean, this is the close one is Edmund Burke's speech to the electors of Bristol, because has got the line in it. Your representative owes you not only his industry but his judgment also, and I think that's actually really important. But of course, people won't see it like that, and
why? Sorry, I just want to push in because it's important. Why don't politicians say it more? They're scared to say it, and they should say it.
Well, yeah, they are. I mean, it's partly, I think it's people, politicians don't necessarily know. It's, but also it's. I mean, I've said I've copy pasted all of Edmund Burke's, speech to the electors of Bristol, so I'm sort of fairly clear about where I am on it, and I've and so on. But it's not an easy thing to do because it's an argument that takes a little bit of making. You have to be careful not to come across as a bit supercilious and condescending, because it's not I know better. It's my function is to spend the time to work out, to read all of this stuff and work out what as best I can what the hell is going on, and then talk to people and work out what the best thing to the best way of dealing with whatever situation it happens to be is. So that's a difficult task. I'm not sure how much elected politicians are necessarily aware of the concept or give that much time. I'm not sure they spend that much time, or we spend that much time thinking about some of the sort of philosophical questions, and I don't think voters do either.
I think a proper debate about our electoral system and about the PR would bring out some of this stuff, and I think it'd be good for the country actually if it was allowed to come out. And I think that's important. It's another benefit of why we need a democracy reset in the UK.
I agree. I mean, I think part of the problem is also we don't do citizenship or civics like some countries do. I think particularly of the States. So we don't actually sort of teach this stuff. I mean, beyond a sort of fairly basic mechanical, there's an election coming up, and don't particularly do that unless you're doing politics or something. So I think that's part of it as well, is that the level of, I'm not saying it's necessarily particularly great in the States. The level of political education in the UK isn't great, and that is compounded by the complicated system we have. Partly, the lots of layers of local government, and we have asymmetric devolution and all the rest of it. But also, we don't have a document that you can go to and say, okay, this is what the system is.
Yeah, I think part of it is this, especially going to the local elections and the whole discussion around, like the rise of reform and so on. I think part of it is the understanding of what local government can or cannot do. And I was reading the story of the 18-year-old reform candidate who won the by-election. And his comments after he won the by-election and so on. And good on him in many ways. Like, one of the things he said, okay, I'll prioritize campaigning to bring a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit to the high street, responding to local campaigners, then speaking about some of the antisocial behavior locally. So again, speaking about the local issues that actually that are within the control of the council. So you have to think, if you're voting for, let's say, this candidate in the local elections, thinking that you'll just stop immigration completely. Obviously, that's something that he cannot do. But what he can do is, as he says, campaigning with the local society there to put a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on the high street in his town. So that's something that I find it quite frustrating in those conversations, because yes, if you're voting, of course, you can argue that you're sending a message higher up in the government if reform win a lot of seats, but ultimately you can't do certain things in local government. So you have to think about who can actually deliver, and if the reform candidate you think will deliver better at the local level, and of course that's a choice on the ballot. But let's not assume that we can end do net zero immigration or whatever is promised on the manifesto by electing people on Cambridgeshire County Council or Huntingdonshire District Council, because it's not the case. But this brings back to this links to David's point about the understanding of the responsibilities, as well as what individual politicians can actually do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and if there's a reality, which is you campaign on a local ticket because there's nothing you can do about national politics, but there's a reality about local elections, which is local elections are a reflection of how people feel about national issues, and it's actually a shame because good candidates lose out as a result of that. People that would serve their communities proud, don't get elected. Because people are sick of their party at a national level, and that is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, this on campaigning as well. Going back to David's question around the issue of we don't have democracy by direct referendum on every single issue, but we have a representative democracy. This goes back to the question around what are we actually voting for, what are the powers, and actually how we're campaigning. I think unfortunately this applies to candidates of every single party I've seen, not only one party, is promising. So first of all, promising things you absolutely cannot deliver at the local level in the leaflet and getting elected, or getting some votes on that basis. Or again, pretending that yes, whatever issue comes up on in this part of the world or another, you will definitely sort it, and you will in fact do democracy by referendum, instead of saying look what I will be if elected. I'll be there to listen, I'll be there to look at different arguments, to read the many thousands of committee papers, and then make a decision based on that. And I think that's something that comes up in the style of campaigning, and the more I would say populist style of campaigning, saying yes, I was out canvassing, 5 people raised this issue, I'll definitely change that and deliver that. When you don't know if you can, or at that stage, at least for many people, and secondly, you haven't even read much on that topic anyway. So I think it's perhaps more people should say actually okay, those are my strengths, those are the values that I will bring in decision making, those are the things that I stand for, and if you agree with my overall approach and my overall values and ideology, then maybe that's a choice for in the local elections, rather than promising stuff I can't deliver, or over promising things that are just not within local authority power.
But people don't buy into that, sadly, and it's a shame, because they should, because that that is a reality about how somebody, if you're elected at the start of an election campaign, in a May election rather than a by-election, you've basically got in most cases 4 years to deliver, and what you're talking about in your campaigning are very short-term issues, when the reality is people should be interested in how you're going to serve for a whole 4 years. And those things you talk about, Alex, are probably more important in that sense. And we know, the sorts of local issues that people campaign on, they tend to be short term, and often people don't have an impact, because there's a reality. You might have a short term impact in stopping something, but actually in the medium term to long term, they tend to happen.
I mean, it also links to the, very popular campaigning by petition. And again, all parties do this. And it's very interesting, and why I'm very reluctant to use this strategy in general, saying okay, there's controversial local issue, I do a petition, save this, or stop this, or something that's very punchy, I can put on the leaflet, do a single issue leaflet. I might or might not believe in that particular thing, but I know it will work to collect data. So then I can write a letter to every single person who respond to my survey, say, I listen to you and I will campaign to stop X or save Y service. And I think this kind of template of campaigning, that's, all political parties use at some point, is actually incentivizing in a way the type of populist politics and undeliverable promises as well, especially if you know that you cannot do that locally.
And some of that is dangerous, because with petitions, as a good example, petitions will tell you how many people feel one way, but they won't tell you how many people feel the other way. And what it means is actually there is a majority of people in almost every case in a petition that that don't sign a petition, don't get involved. And so if you took a strictly raw view of the outcome of a politician, it is that most people don't support the policy that you're raising a petition for. But the reality is it's probably sometimes not the case. But it is true that petitions are a form of populism that people use to justify actions, and I'm not a fan. I used one. I think I've said on here before, I've never used one. I did once, which was about committing to retaining free parking in Fenland Market Town, which I think for Fenland is the right thing to do. But actually, in doing that, I was opposing the Conservative administration at Fenland when I did it, so it's a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, the original idea, petition to redress grievances. I think I think petitions are useful when they're being done by, if you like, not political parties. When it's actually a group of citizens saying, look, do something about this because you're not paying attention to it. And I think that not paying attention to things is kind of important. I think a big part of one of the things that concerns me, and I've talked about this before, is local media, or the lack thereof. That it's quite hard. I don't know, maybe it was ever thus, but it's quite hard to find out what's going on Huntingdon Town Council, Manchester Town Council, whatever you want. It's hard to find out quite often what's going on at the district council or the county council. And I get that not everybody is that interested, but I do think it's actually kind of important. It's sort of large amounts of money, but it's things that really shape the areas we live in, and they don't get a huge amount of coverage. I mean, it's part of the reason I like doing this, and it's part of the reason I do my videos, and other people do things just to sort of talk about what's going on, because it does really affect people's lives, and it's not getting a huge amount of coverage.
I mean, I would agree with that. I think there's a danger, and this is part of if looking back on 2024, some of the announcements that Angela Rayner's made about local government restructuring, which I think are really important and really, really much needed. A single tier of local government might put more focus, as an example, on issues like adult social care, which are basically, it's a broken system that is absolutely eating money and is stifling county councils and top tier councils, and children's social care as well, which there are issues around children's social care that I could bleat on about for days, but those things, doing something to bring them to the fore, because they are an inherent part and an important part of every council, I think will be a good thing, and it might be the thing that actually drives some of the change we need. That's a reality. So the stuff, I'm not against the stuff. It's all about the delivery, but I'm not against the announcements that Angela Rayner's made, to be honest. I think council restructuring is much needed, and the next step is, how is it going to pan out?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I was thinking before, if you actually had like proper regional government, you could then almost have like BBC regions that match the all these newsroom regions, that match the area. I don't know, maybe it's me, being wildly optimistic, because actually people aren't that interested in politics, and yeah, I don't know.
But there's an inevitability. Places like Skye could not ignore regional government in the way that at a national level, and the way Skye is structured, it does at the moment. And again, to my perspective, a good thing, because the media focus at the moment is on their analysis of politics is all about finding the next big issue. It's not about proper debate and proper discussion. And some of that proper debate and discussion happens at a local level as well.
Yeah,
you had regional government, you couldn't ignore that, and so you would see a restructuring of how Skye operates for definite.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things as well is we spend too much time talking about politics and not enough about policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did we talk about the local elections? I'm thinking about Cambridge and Peterborough.
No, we didn't.
How about this? Cambridge is still Labour and Peterborough is still a car crash.
I think Peterborough's it's in a difficult place because it's struggling financially, and it's been struggling for a number of years, and that doesn't help. And so, the only way they're out of that, one of the ways out of that is some restructuring will help, but one of the ways out of it is increasing council tax, which again is unpopular. But that was something that was started under the previous administration, and quite rightly, it was an acceptance of where the problem was. And I think that's difficult. But Peterborough is such a diverse city in all sorts of ways that makes the politics difficult as well.
Yeah, and it's. I do wonder if there will be at any point a relaxation of the 5% cap, and if there is a relaxation of that, how many councils, Peterborough and otherwise, will immediately go to whatever the new limit is, just because so many places are short on cash.
No, absolutely, but in effect that. What it is a government's way of if they did do it, that would be government's way of passing the problem down, because actually the problem with cash is a government issue. If you look at the profile since 2010, maybe marginally before that, but basically 2010, you look at which departments have been hit and where funding has been hit most, and local authorities are the big victims. And it's local authorities that are having to fund social care, as an example, with a diminishing pot. I know government have done some things to deal with that, but it's very, very much short-termism.
Yeah, and I mean this goes to the ideas behind the big society and so on. It didn't work. You didn't have organisations stepping in. I mean, now I this may be somewhere that will disagree. I'm not sure it was ever going to work.
So
But where hang on, where what they also it was also trying to be done really very quickly, and that was
sorry, go on.
no. So and it's not it's the speed with which it was implemented, and that meant a lot of cuts.
Sorry. I think slightly differently. I do think the big society worked in the medium term. I think there was around that time there was a big increase in volunteering and stuff. We've seen a rise in a number of different community groups in and around Fenland as a result of whether it's as a result of the big society, but certainly from the point that Cameron started talking about the big society. Organizations like Street Pride are, a great example who do a lot of litter picking and all sorts of stuff around the town. I do think the big society worked, and it may have worked because it coincided with austerity. It may have done, but so I do think it had some impact. Whether it would have had more impact given more time, we'll never know.
I mean, I think it works until one point. I mean, if you take any kind of especially local charity, I think it works until you have so much demand that unless you have like longer term funding from local authority or other grants or something else, you cannot meet the demands. Like I think like food banks are like a good example, or like some, like very local charities doing like essential support in the community. I think they're successful in the sense of like many people do get lots of people through the door, and they're a big part of the local community, but then they cannot meet the demand in some communities given how their funding works at the moment. So I know many charities rely on those shorter term grants, or they don't have, like perhaps it was more common in the past, like longer contracts with different like grant contracts, and therefore it becomes more difficult to plan long term again. So yeah, I think like certain things, unfortunately, we just have some bad policies or very difficult financial situations, and we can't just sort it by having more local charities doing supporting with essential needs.
There's no issue on the sorry, this is just one, because with this is with I'm the chair of trustees of Hunt Shop Mobility. One of the issues with funding is actually we can get grant funding. So actually, if we need a new mobility scooter, we can actually probably get the money for that relatively easily. Getting revenue funding is hard.
Great.
And that's something that I think councils used to be able to do. And the thing is, they can't do that at the moment. Because of the financial situation or have been able to for some time. Now, in fairness to Huntingdonshire, and I think this was true under the previous administration and currently, they support Hunt's Forum, which is the Huntingdonshire Forum of Charitable Organisations. Hunt's Forum is amazing, and they provide advice to to the third sector on lots of things, including what funding is out there. So it's a clever way of spending the money. If you've got limited resources, how do we get the most to try and support third sector organisations? But it's still depending on the third sector to deliver services which aren't quite core, but which are important, and are difficult to make work. And it's the sort of, with Shop Mobility, it was before I was involved, the funding sort of disappeared pretty much overnight. And it's, Treasurer Steve Greenhill and Celia Barden, the manager, basically rushed around to try and sort something.
And a lot of that stems back to austerity but also the way councils are funded, and the fact that councils have an annual funding settlement, which means for them, if they're committing to a 3-year sort of revenue funding stream for an organisation, you get into a situation where they're committing to that without knowing, in 12 months' time, how much money they're going to have. And that stifles local authorities as well. But austerity was really difficult for the investment that was needed in and is still needed in prevention and preventative strategies, within children's services, within adult social care. How do you stop people from needing adult social care till a later point in their life, as an example, which is good for them and good for the council's budget. And those things just became more and more difficult, and that's actually, it's one of those things about reforming social care. But when government talk about reforming social care, what they mean is reforming social care funding by giving it more, and that's all they ever do is throw more money at it without actually dealing with the real issues.
I mean, I think they so a couple of sets. One is there's a fundamental thing that we have got an aging population, and where we are not economically active for longer. So economically active here I mean either in work or looking for work.
Yeah.
So, and that means that no matter how you slice that, more, if you like, of gross national income is going to support people. So there is less money available for other things. Now, whether that's done through the taxation system or not, that's just that's just the way it is. So there's that presents a real challenge. I do also wonder if there's you'll know more about this. Sorry, Martin. I was about to call you Stuart for some reason. I haven't had my coffee. Certainly in looked after children, we seem to have ended up using a very expensive service that is sort of funded through some of the like worst excesses of capitalism, with sort of it's like different rather sort of shameless investment funds running children's homes, which seems rather worrying. And I do wonder if it would be possible to bring some of that in-house and do it more effectively, more cheaply, or if that is that even desirable at all? I don't know.
I don't think that's the answer, is the reality. Whether it's desirable or not, I don't know. I think instinctively there are a lot of people. I'm not one that's sold on this, but there are a lot of people that feel that instinctively children's homes, if as a county council, as a top tier council, you are the one that is the corporate parent for those children, instinctively I can see why some people feel it's right that you're the ones that are in control of the housing and the accommodation that those people live in. I get the argument. I don't necessarily buy into it, because I think anybody that is involved in that field has to have a big conscience and a little bit of innovation. Sometimes one of the things that the public sector brings is the private sector brings a little bit of innovation, and that is a sector that needs innovation, but it needs a lot more than that. From my perspective, with looked after children, it has been the standard to which we look after those children in general, I think is shameful. There's a reality. Some children do thrive, when they become looked after, but there's a reality that too many of them end up, too many looked after children end up in the prison system. And, these are children that the state has said the parenting you are receiving. And, this is one of the reasons that children end up in care, to be fair. The standard of care you're receiving from your parents is not good enough to the point of being dangerous. And therefore, we are going to become your parent. That is effectively what happens. And we become a parent, and we don't become a good parent. We don't become a nurturing parent that makes sure that child thrives throughout its life. And we need to look at our system fundamentally to change it so that that's what it becomes.
And that's something that, like, over the last year, speaking about review of 2024, it was discussed a lot in the Children's Committee, and there's some very high cost placements in Cambridge, in every single county or like unitary council. So I remember we were discussing about some placements being more than like £15,000 per week in some of the residential childcare, and there has been a proposal like this year to convert 2 properties that the Cambridgeshire County Council has into children's homes that we discussed at committee, but there's still a provider to contracted to run the homes, but we're looking at to agree a cost cap for that provider to run the homes. But I think that's a massive issue across the UK, the very high cost placements, and whether it's more, it works better to have to convert some council properties and run it with the provider, or to bring the service in-house, or to perhaps reform some of the private system operating it. That's, I think, a difficult question, because I think it depends on the needs of the child, and some placements are very specialized as well, and often, like for a lot of councils, perhaps you don't have, or you have to train the workforce and the skills to be able to run some of the more specialized services, whereas other councils might have the capacity in-house. So I think it's always a decision of what you can actually do, but I'm actually looking forward to see like how that proposal works to convert 2 of the council properties, whether it works more effectively, or whether that manages to bring down some of the costs of the high cost placements.
I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, the thing is, a relative of mine, who's now a young adult, wasn't looked after, but needed a lot of help, a lot of issues, and lives in sort of supported accommodation, going through school and so on. It was a real battle for their parents to get support they needed. But partly I can see why. It is incredibly expensive. I'm not saying the person's name for obvious reason, but that person did receive at different times really quite a lot of support.
But they should. The question for me is whether it's the right sort of support. And one of the things for me is what we don't do is look internationally at what best practice is, and and learn from that, and bring that into what is it other countries are doing that is right, that turns these young people into great citizens who lead a thriving life. What is it others do that we don't, and that's the things we need to be thinking about. And if it needs big cultural change, then so be it. It's the right thing to do. And there's a reality that actually it's a preventative thing as well. If we invest early in this stuff, we're more than likely going to save money in the long term as well, because if you're turning these people into thriving adults, not only are they going to avoid as an example, entering the prison system and all that stuff, they're going to be earning money and paying tax, and so there's a long-term benefit. But the system just doesn't do it. We're dreadful at it in this country, the prevention.
I mean, this is definitely. I mean, just on print, this is going off topic. There's a case I'm familiar with locally, or someone I ended up sort of trying to help a bit, came out of prison in a different part of the country, which is where they'd been inside, sent back to this part of the world, and so on. The level of support they got was really very, very low, like to the point that like they were a few hours from being homeless, literally like on the street homeless. And it's like, and it's a difficult ask. Spend more money on ex-cons. You can see why that doesn't go down well, but
that system could pretty much pay for itself though, just by reducing the prison population, by not sending people to prison who shouldn't be there. When they come out, actually giving doing what you can to make sure that they firstly, while they're in prison, firstly we send too many people to prison, and when we do,
that short sentences are a great way of making sure that you can't do any rehabilitation and you completely disrupt their lives.
Absolutely.
Not a huge amount of necessarily rehabilitation going on, some more generally, because of the issues and the problems with the estate, and just it's so full. But also one, you'd hope that while people are inside there is some rehabilitation, but when they come out there does need to be more support to prevent people falling back to
and some of that is about populism, and that's a reality. Is people don't want to spend money on prisoners, and our rehabilitation is shocking. It's a reality, but there's all sorts of reasons for that. But I think you could almost self-fund that system. My suspicion, based on the language we get from government, is that they're headed in that direction. But I don't hear anything about that. In fact, we're hearing nothing that I've heard of about changes to adult social care, as an example, or changes to children's social care either, or anybody investing in something that will identify a better way forward. That's the reality, and those are things the government should do, because if they start to make growth happen, I think that is an if, but if they do start to make growth happen, what do they do as a consequence of that? Because what's the priority for spending as that happens? And for me, the investment in prevention is what they need to do, and there's no sense. What they need to do is be ready for that, and local authorities need to be ready for it as well. And that's part of what government should be doing now, is being ready for that for that improvement in standards of living that we hope is going to come.
Yeah, I mean, just on the crime thing, I mean, almost what we're saying is that we should be tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime.
Tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime was absolutely the right statement.
Yeah.
The issue with that was, as with a lot of things in Blair's government, was delivery. That he was very, very good at that sort of stuff, but he was very, very good at not dealing with problems. The big crisis in adult social care started to emerge during Blair's time. As an example, you think about, I could talk about this a lot because I've been looking at it recently, but if you think about, the fact that Tony Blair wasn't brave enough to deal with a strong voice about gay marriage, so he put the fudge in place that was civil marriage. If you look at fox hunting, yes, he put in fox hunting legislation, but it was an absolute basket case because of the fact that Tony Blair fudged it to try and do something that worked for both ways. He did it actually a lot on so many issues, and he did it on foreign policy as well, which is the shameful thing. I'm currently reading Rory Stewart's a book about his time as an MP. Some of this, not the fox hunting stuff, but some of the stuff about foreign policy is interesting because of that.
Yeah. I mean, the other one, I can't remember. There's a book I read last year from a former British diplomat, and gosh, I can't remember, but who was a reasonably senior diplomat, basically during the leading up to and during most of the Blair era. They were absolutely scathing. But anyway, this is it's
to be fair and balanced. Rory Stewart is absolutely scathing about David Cameron and foreign policy, where he had no interest in detail at all and was more interested in pithy comments, really. That he could sell in the UK. So yeah,
and again, this thing, I'm gonna. If you I mean, we probably. I mean, we've got things to talk about, and we've got some things that we wanted to talk about, just to mention things that have happened. I wanted, if it's all right with you both, just to briefly respond to Kevin Mitchin-Finkel on Facebook. Kevin, I don't know if you're still there. What you're saying and the way you're saying it is, I think, quite a lot of the problem we have with politics at the moment, where you're assuming bad faith on the other side. So take the first comment. I think it's about time we actually had a government that actually did what they were given power by the people to do, instead of wrecking the country and making Britain worse for everyone. look, I've quite publicly criticised the government, but at the same time, it's this, you disagree with what's being done. I'm guessing with some of it doesn't mean that they're trying to wreck the country or anything like that. But moving on, for a start, they could listen to the farmers instead of destroying our farms for ideological reasons, because we all know it's not about taxation, because they've already offered foreign farmers abroad the money. This is just, firstly, it's complete cobblers. There is money offered, foreign aid offered overseas. It's about, I think it's 0.5% of GDP. That money is being used, amongst other things, to make it easier, keep countries stable, support refugees in and near their own countries, and so on, and mitigate the effects of climate change, which are all things that directly benefit us at home. I don't think we should be giving, we should just be doing things out of narrow self-interest, but quite a lot of that actually is. But it's this destroying our farms for ideological reasons. No, this isn't clear. This isn't a case of wanting to destroy farms. And if that's the attitude, frankly, we're in sort of real trouble as a country. You might think the policy is ill-conceived or badly implemented. The basic idea here is that money needs to be raised. Labour wants to spend more, and there's also a large national debt and so on, and so wants to raise more in taxation. It's said that it isn't going to do that from certain taxes, and so no surprise there's going to be taxation elsewhere. Personally, I'd have preferred we'd been upfront and said no more. We're going to have to put up income tax. That wasn't the discussion. And then, is this a long-winded student political debate? Look, this is us talking about politics. Okay, the format, the style isn't for everyone. I am legendarily slow to get to a point, and I say and ah too much. If you're not a fan, switch off. Just the throwing muck all the time just makes politics really, really difficult. I've engaged with Kevin on Facebook and on Messenger and so on. If the starting point is that the other person is engaging in is doing things in bad faith, and all you're going to do is throw insults, then frankly you're part of the problem. You're part of the reason why democracy isn't working in this country at the moment, because you don't want to engage in the issues. You just want a sugar hit of a cheap and easy answer, when the cheap and easy answers don't work or make things worse.
That's one of the dangers about the PR issue is that there's a thing about that it is seen as one of those cheap and easy answers. It's not cheap and easy, but it's one of the concerns I have. But I absolutely support that, and I'll just make a point about this might upset a few people about the comment you made about foreign aid. The very same people who want continuous cuts to the foreign aid budget to focus money in the UK also are demanding lower immigration. And if you can't see the link between cutting foreign aid and rising immigration, then don't engage in a debate.
Yeah, on that, I had a very fun time on X over, I think, just before Christmas Day, when I just put, basically, I didn't even expect to get any traction. So I did my tax return on my self-employed income early, and you get the annual tax summary on HMRC. Everyone works in the UK can log in, and obviously you see the breakdown on how unsurprisingly most goes to the welfare budget, NHS, and you go down and see each category where your tax goes to. And the number of comments of people being because I said, people who are saying that lots of the money goes on foreign aid and net zero is actually not true, because the top lines in the budget are not that. Here's an example, a specific example on how your income tax gets spent. Obviously, there are other taxes, needless to mention that. But for anyone to think it's actually surprising, of course, we spend most, and you can debate whether it's too much or too little. And I agree, some things can be more efficient. But the reality is, yes, NHS spending and welfare spending is significantly more than like foreign aid will ever be. And in fact, foreign aid was actually, as a percentage, higher under the previous government than now. And I think that's an interesting discussion whether this government now has to perhaps review that. But this idea that like, oh, suddenly we have Labour coming to power, socialism, and we're funding more foreign aid. Actually, it was higher as a percentage under the previous Conservative government, and I think many people from the Labour benches now are thinking about like, well, we should review that, because at the moment it's probably 0.5%. It used to be like closer to 0.7 or 0.7. So there's an entire like campaign saying it should be back to 0.7. But yeah, I totally agree with Martin's points about again, like speaking about like the causes as well. Like if you want to prevent some of the very difficult and complex situations which do create movements of people fleeing their homes and so on, you have to look at this and consider it seriously, rather than thinking like, well, we should like some of the comments say on X under my post, like, oh, it should be like absolutely 0% forever and so on. Well, that's the easy answer. The difficult thing is to think about, okay, what can you actually prevent? How can you actually support some of the things outside of the UK to actually make sure that people don't come to the UK if they don't need to. Like, there's a big part of that immigration debate that's often not spoken about. It's like, what are the drivers of migration? Before even like thinking about like processing and caseload and home office budget, is what are the actual drivers of some of the migration?
Well, I can talk about this forever. And as a one nationist, it's clear to me you need to take this same one nationist approach, and apply it globally. And there's a reality about the origins of Disraeli's one nationism, which is the perception that there was, and quite rightly, the perception that there was about affluence, and how the poorer communities and poorer people and working people in this country were seeing themselves working to keep people affluent and not improving their own standards of living. And that's where this issue about sort of two nations comes from. And you can say the same thing in the UK. You can't ignore the fact that people are looking at the UK, they're looking at America, they're looking at Germany, they're looking at France, looking at the standards of living that they see there, and seeing a huge disparity between where they are and where the West is. And that is bound to be attractive when you're living, in a war zone or whatever. And there's a reality of that also, which is they probably only see the best parts of what we are as well. They don't see some of the inner city deprivation and stuff like that, because it's not something that the international media is talking about, is levels of deprivation in the UK and all of that stuff. And the only way we're going to improve that is by improving people's lives abroad. And that's the thing about taking one nationism and applying it on a global scale, which for anybody that's not a one nationist, would absolutely hate. But that's the reality as I see it. What you do with that money, and this is where the Rory Stewart thing comes into it, is another matter. Government-run programs and government initiatives don't work. That's clear.
I mean, sorry, this is going way off topic. One of the things that Rory Stewart has talked about, he's involved with this organisation that does direct cash grants, which seems to be very effective. It's
an interesting debate, this one, because I think also we have to look at where, I think it's right to think about where it is spent as well, because I think when it was 0.7%, it was before COVID. And I think one of the reasons to reduce it was actually the financial impact of COVID. But anyway, like about a third of that budget under the in 2023 figures was actually spent on UK-based refugees. So basically the hotel bill. So I think one of the arguments that this government is making now is if you're managing that more effectively in terms of like, the whole discussion around the use of hotels and how much that costs, that actually can free up some of that budget to spend abroad. So I think it's an interesting discussion about, okay, you have the 0.5%, but how much of it is actually spent abroad as opposed to on asylum hotels, for example, because under the 2023 budget, about I think 28% was spent on asylum hotels inside the UK.
I mean, I have to say that the one area where I think the rest of it, my view is Labour are taking a long-term view, and I've said before, that Labour don't have to be popular now; they have to be popular at the next general election, and that gives them a chance to do some medium-term stuff, even if not long-term stuff. And I think sort of that's what they're doing. The area where I think they're going wrong to me is foreign policy. They've not bit the bullet about the need for increased defence spending. And they've said they'll set out a path to achieving 3.5% of GDP on defence. They need to get on with it now. They really do. That internationally, they need to do it. I'm not sure David Lammy is the right person to be a foreign secretary, and they need to start thinking seriously about what they're doing on foreign aid, because if they are serious about trying to really crack the causes of immigration and dealing with some of that, they're not going to do it without A, getting how they spend foreign aid right, but B, getting the foreign aid budget up. And that may be unpopular with people, but it will reduce immigration, which will be popular.
Can I pick up a couple of things there? One is, and this is, in a previous life, I worked for a thing called the Atlantic Council, doing stuff in and around NATO. And one of the things, as well as the actual target, is how it's spent, because there were some NATO members there weren't many who actually met the 2%, but were spending relatively close to it, but could deploy, what one Unimog, and that was about it. So there's also a question about how it's spent. So is the spending effective? We know also that procurement within MOD, this isn't just a UK problem, but I mentioned MOD, is often really, really problematic. So there's stuff to be done there as well. On the immigration thing, is immigration is when you've got lots of immigration all at once into one place, it isn't properly managed, it causes a problem. Immigration, I don't know, slightly the thing is we've got we've got immigration people, I don't know, my sister-in-law moved, came to Britain, who's now my sister-in-law because she met my brother and they got married, and that's great, and so on. I suppose what I'm saying is that immigration covers lots of different things. We do want Britain to be an open and attractive place for people to come and work, but generally, but also from the sort of national interest point of view, where they're going to be adding money to UK PLC, whether that's directly through taxation or because they may, through businesses and so on, and innovation in the UK. So there's that as well. We've got a particular problem around the world where people are moving in ways that they didn't used to. Sorry, that's not true. People are moving, seeking asylum and so on. It's become easier than ever to move around. So I think I'm saying that the biggest category of illegal immigrant in the UK is people who have overstayed their visa. They've come here on a visa for one purpose and have overstayed it. So you do have some people who things have got to be pretty grim if you're going to try and try getting across the Channel or across the Straits of Gibraltar in a rickety little boat.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
So I don't know. There's it's like immigration. There's just a lot that comes into that. Yeah.
There's also, though, and this is one of the things that one of the ironies is where we are at the moment as a country with immigration and the way the immigration debate is and where we're going to go. And there's a reality, which is that we've got a declining birth rate in this country. Yeah. And that is going to mean in a few years' time that funding for pensions is going to become a crisis, and people are going to be crying out for more immigration in order to ease that problem. There's a reality about the fact that we seem to be headed in that direction. There's another argument about reforming how pensions work, but that'll take a couple of generations.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think there's something that was discussing in a different context previously, like around pensions. I think the other thing that changed quite a lot, especially in, like looking at like most of my friends and people in my generation, the number of people who are, self-employed compared to previous generations, number of people who are like on 0-hour contracts or on insecure employment, and how that funding is not as stable as it was, like when it used to be like, well, you leave school or university, you get a stable job, you pay, like diligently into your pension every single month. This is not the case anymore. Like for like, this, my generation, especially the younger generation, there's so many more people who are not, who haven't even paid their national insurance contributions like every year because of the type of the employment, or the fact that many people who are self-employed don't really, until you come to the age to understand, like, well, I should probably invest in this pension. Like so many of my friends haven't thought about it yet. I mean, I have, but I think compared to a lot of people, like they haven't, because you prioritize the cost of living crisis and everything, your immediate needs. And it will become like it will be at one point in time when, I think I agree with Martin, there will be a crisis of like, actually, even the current generation working in the UK is not paying in as, as regularly, I guess, than previous generations, which is really, really scary to think about.
Yeah. No, it is, and there's something I think there's some reform needed around some of this stuff, and that's one of the things maybe the government should look at. But again, it'll be in the short term, it'll be unpopular. But it'll have to be, it will be unpopular. But this is the point. Government sometimes have to do unpopular things, especially in a world where people are demanding more and more from public services, and yet are demanding to pay less taxation. The government have got to bite the bullet on that and start talking about it. They have done to a certain extent, and the Conservatives should be talking about it as well, to be fair.
I mean, there's also the same thing as well, same thing as I mentioned earlier, that people are being not economically active for longer, and so on. And the thing is, pensions today. Richard, thank you for nice comment from Richard. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The pensions today, like state pensions, are paid for by people by general taxation today. They're not paid for by people having saved money previously. I'm talking about state pensions. They're a benefit paid for out of general taxation today.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing, Alex, is my dad basically.
Can I just interrupt there, because it's important that's when I talked about long-term change, my preference would be for us to move to something where pensions are funded by expanding what we currently have as stakeholder pensions, so that you're investing into your own pension pot effectively, and you would have to cut central taxation to do it. But I think in the long term, it's a far more sustainable way of operating. But I don't see government heading that direction, and it's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with the how you fund pensions and so on, you may well be right. This is the sort of thing where you look at the numbers involved and over how long it operates, where sort of people start saving now for a pension they won't claim for 40 years. And it's the sort of thing where my eyes start glazing over, just because it is not an easy problem to solve.
Yeah, but it's one that when you get to my age, it becomes much closer and much more important. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I was going
to just going back to review of 2024, somebody who celebrated his 60th birthday in 2024. You're becoming one of these bloody pensioners that we're all paying for. I'm not for a few years yet. I have got some pension, but for stuff I paid into.
Yeah. And no, I was going to say the other thing is the way people work has changed. So my dad basically spent his entire life working for one company, Western Helicopters. I think I worked it out. By the time I got married, I'd had more jobs than my dad had in his, it's the way people, that expectation is gone. Yeah. Anyway,
It's just one final point on it. I also think it's the financial education, which I think is actually, it's really difficult of how do I actually inform people. So I think it's true, so many people have so many different types of jobs. So for example, in the last 10 years, I lost count, over 20 different part-time temporary contracts, some employment, some self-employment, some have pensions, some have 3%, some have 5%, some have nothing, some have different schemes and different pension providers. So just the knowledge of okay, how do I actually check what I have so far? It's really difficult for people working in this current market, where it's actually quite common to have to change job frequently, or to have 2 different part-time jobs at the same time with different contributions, different providers, and so on. So I think that's something we should think about, how to actually inform the general population better, about checking those things and making sure that you're actually aware what you're paying into, because many people are not.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of tokenism goes on around all this stuff, but there's not enough done. But that's about having the right discussions at and the right commentary at a national level. But when there's a reality, if you want to educate somebody around this stuff, the way you're going to have to do it is through the media. And are the media going to be interested? Absolutely not. And that's a reality. Sky News are not going to run an article educating people about how they invest in pensions, neither the BBC. And from that point of view, that's part of the issue about the news media.
I do agree, but you do have people like, what's his name, Money Saving Expert.
Brian Lewis, he's fantastic. Yeah. Who
I think are. I mean, it's. And I think I think he has quite a lot of reach as well. Whether
he reaches the right people or not is what I would say, but I do think he's excellent. Yeah.
Should we talk about the things that we've gone all over the place? Should we talk about what's happened briefly in Cambridgeshire over the last year?
Yeah, I'm trying to, we've talked about, the general election and the local elections, in Cambridgeshire. And I think, those are really important. But actually, we've also seen this increase in bus provision around Cambridgeshire. Given we're called Coffee, Buses and Politics, I think that's really important, and I think it's important anyway for Cambridgeshire. And it's one of the things that I hope the momentum continues in next year. And I have concerns with the way the debate around the mayoral election is emerging. That's not going to be the case. But I was looking at something the other day. I'm up in Sheffield at the moment. And Sheffield, and comments in Sheffield about a cut to the number 11 bus service, as an example, and that's what people around the country are dealing with. And in Cambridgeshire, what we're dealing with is how are we going to grow our bus service? That's exciting.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting is there enough time, or will a decision be made before the May elections on the franchising consultation that we just had and has finished this year, and to what extent that will be able to influence the decision, to influence anything, whatever comes after May? That's an interesting thing for me, because the whole consultation happened. I think, I'm not sure how many responses there are in total. I've seen a note from the Combined Authority recently. They're being now analyzed. By some point in the new year, in 2025, there will be a discussion around the results of that and what is the next step. There are some people arguing that any decision should be put off until after the May elections. Many people say no, the consultation was done, we can have a decision on this, how we progress in early 2025. It's yet to be seen, but that's something that could actually change a lot of things if it was progressed one way or the other.
I think we know the trouble is you can do this about elections all the time, and all it does is stop the system operating. They need to bite the bullet and go ahead with franchising, is my view. I know it's a decision, yes or no. In my view, it's a clear yes. And from a conservative perspective, they should be looking at franchising as something that is a conservative thing to do. It's not privatization of bus services. It's not that. It is franchising and operating a franchising system. So it still maintains a private sector input and private sector delivery. It's just delivered in a different way. And so there's nothing that is not conservative about bus franchising. So from my perspective, both the mayor and the conservative mayoral candidate, both got something to sell on it.
So I think the thing is franchising. The issue with franchising is how much public taxation you put into the franchising system, how much public money, and where does that come from?
But we're already in a position where we are able to do that through the mayor's precepts, and and so we are able to do that. What we can then do is start to, one of the things franchising does is allow you to use profits from some of the routes to subsidize others, and so potentially you're expanding what you've got.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's a cheaper way, So earlier in the year, Nick Johnson, the mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, when Stagecoach pulled out of a whole load of routes, Nick stepped in and was able to sort out the financing to keep some of those routes going, which is great, absolutely the right thing to do, and I'm delighted it happened. It's kind of an inefficient way of doing it. There are more efficient ways of funding the buses.
It is definitely, because what happens now, like with the current mayoral preset, is that Nick is using the preset to plug in the gaps where the services have been withdrawn. So let's say a route is cut because not profitable enough or like whatever reason, then okay, we're putting in the preset money through your council tax bill to plug in that gap, which is great for people using the service. You maintain like many services connecting, villages and parts that are not necessarily seen as a commercially profitable route, but then you are not able to do what Martin was saying, to actually use some of the profits made from profitable routes to subsidize some of those routes. You're just plugging in the gap with preset money, which is not a long-term solution. However, saying that, I agree that whoever is the candidate should go ahead with the conversation around franchising. But if you are campaigning as a candidate on a platform that the preset is a very bad idea, and do everything in your powers to remove that, you already have like one source of revenue like already gone from your plans.
But let's be clear though. Let's be clear that if you are doing that as a candidate, you need to be honest about the level of taxation that the mayor's precept is. So when you start talking about 200% increases and stuff like that, let's also talk about the fact that the mayor's precept is £36.
Yeah. It's not mentioned in the political videos.
Yeah.
But I think again, it's like one of the, coming back to the earlier conversation around populism, it's something that's like one of those things that it's like so good for the leaflet, right? Saying like, well, 200% increase. Do you agree with like this tax, like the mayor's tax and so on? And then like the natural reaction is like, oh my God, like it's increased so much. I know, obviously I don't agree, without even explaining how much it is or what it actually funds, i.e. the routes that were previously cut. And of course, you can still agree or disagree that this is the most efficient or a good way to fund buses. I mean, many people disagree, but it's very dishonest to just say, well, this, mayor's tax has increased a lot, without saying, okay, if I was going to go ahead with bus improvements, how would I fund it?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's that's the concern I have, that we need to understand this debate, and we need to be informed about, as an example, this comment that I'll never increase the mayor's precept. What that means is actually services will diminish, because if you don't increase the mayor's precept by inflation, then actually the actual value of the precept goes down every year. You might benefit a little by population growth, but that's a reality, and that needs to be talked through as well during the campaign. But yeah, I think the bus thing is, to me, the most important thing that's happened through 2024 in terms of Cambridgeshire politics, for all sorts of reasons, but because it's local as well, and it is a local thing. And so, government talking about devolution and being meaningful about it, and we're seeing something local actually in action, that is driven locally, where Cambridgeshire is doing something and achieving something that isn't being achieved elsewhere. And to me, that's what Cambridgeshire should be doing all the time. But the fact that we are, I think, is something that we should applaud. And is it perfect? No. It'll probably take 10, 15 years of moving forward with this system for it to have its real impact in terms of passenger numbers and stuff like that. And that's my concern, is somebody will take a really short-term look at this and look at bus numbers in certain places and just suddenly and start cutting again based on passenger numbers. But you need to give this thing 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is it's also the amount of time. Okay, let's say you bring in franchising. We need to actually build a network. I haven't finished yet. I'm doing because I was bored yesterday, using a metro mapping software thing to do like a network map of buses in Cambridgeshire. Buses that serve Huntingdon. And it's interesting because you see just what a mess it is, that it isn't a network. It's buses running almost at random.
I looked at that, and my first thought was, please don't show that to people in Whittlesea, because they'll be absolutely up in arms about the difference in bus services between Whittlesea and Huntingdon. That's what I first looked at it and thought. But there's a reality that we have seen improved services. We've got a late night bus service coming back from Peterborough to Whittlesea, which is something that we should have. The bus service now serves the Amazon warehouse, where a lot of people work, and again, probably not a lot of people using it at the moment, but it needs time to bed in for that to happen, and people to understand that they can use it rather than drive. But we have seen improvements. I'd like to see more. I'd like to see demand responsive service around Whittlesea, and that's something that we need to push for. I think a demand responsive service would enable buses to operate around bits of Whittlesea that don't have buses at the moment.
And talking of demand responsive services, I took Tiger on Demand for the first time. It's actually very good. The app is really good. It's easy to use, and all worked very well. Really.
I downloaded the app, and I haven't used it yet. I was planning to, like, over the next week after in the new year, to select a destination, maybe do like a whole day trying different Tiger on Demand services. But I really like the app, because initially when it was announced, they said, like, you have to call this number, and I was like, there's absolutely no way I'm calling to book like every single bus. But now I downloaded the app, and it's actually like works quite well. Like the interface looks a bit like Uber or like a taxi app, so it's actually quite good. So I'm looking forward to using it. But meanwhile, I use the usual Busway BN66, Whippet 66 over the Christmas period, including on Christmas Eve, because that's one of the things that I really, and I put a post up saying, like, I'm really grateful to everyone working over the Christmas period, including in public transport, because on Christmas Eve going into town, I thought, like, there's no way I'm going to drive when everyone is doing their last minute shopping and trying to find a parking space in Huntingdon. So I actually took the bus there and back, and it was like really, really good. I even saw a Tiger on Demand stopped at Hinchinbrook, and it was a really good service. And I think the buses have improved quite a lot in Huntingdon. Of course, not all perfect. There's still issues, especially I see on the God Manchester group around some of the bus service that goes through there. But I think overall we're heading in the right direction, and I would hate if this progress would be stopped, later in the year, depending on the results of the elections. But hopefully all the candidates will actually see that this is something that is actually popular. People do like improved bus services, and it's something that needs a serious consideration rather than, unfunded promises.
Yeah, I agree. I have yet to work out how I'm getting to where we're having our drinks tomorrow night. So that might be that might be I don't know if Tiger on Demand goes that way, but that might be my introduction to it. So we'll see.
Unfortunately, I think it's just outside the area where we're going. But I think from where you are, your best bet is actually going to be might actually be to go to Peterborough and get the 904.
Okay. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I was thinking, well, never mind. This is really exciting for anybody that's watching, but I was thinking of getting a train down to Huntingdon and a bus out. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is the kind of cutting edge content that people tune in for. I'm just going to pick up on a comment from Marcus. Need to equalise pensions between the public and private sector. 20% of council tax is now allocated to paying state pensions. I don't know what the figure is. I think perhaps there's a little imprecision with the terms there.
Yeah.
So council tax, if by state pension, if you mean the pension that you get from, because you paid your NI and so on, council tax isn't allocated. 20% of council tax is not allocated to paying state pensions. I mean, ultimately, state pensions are paid from the consolidated fund. So, I mean, I don't know if you mean the pensions of employees.
I think that's what it probably refers to. I think it's probably a little bit of it's a wording issue, but
Okay.
The level of taxation that is spent from the council tax. The Cambridgeshire pension scheme, basically, I think is what that's talking about, and it is high, absolutely, but that's. People have got contracts of employment that stipulate that they get that level of pension, and that that's a reality, and it's sort of made worse by the fact that people live longer, and we should applaud the fact that people are living longer in reality. But it's a difficult one. How do you reform it? Do you make the pension less attractive, which will make it a less attractive place to work? I'm not sure that's what you want to do.
I mean, I think it's very difficult, especially to equalize, like in terms of private sector, because you have on the one end, like, large companies that can afford to pay like very good, pension schemes, and then you have actually like a lot of, I mean, probably the majority of companies being micro enterprises or small businesses that probably are on the minimum. Like in my organization, it's like 3%, because at the moment we can't afford to pay more. So it's like actually a lot of the kind of private small businesses actually have very low pensions. So it's, I think, very difficult to kind of equalize between a big multinational like having a good pension scheme and lots of the small businesses that can't afford to pay more than the minimum they should pay, really. So I think there's an issue in the private sector as well, in terms of especially the growth of small businesses and the pressures on small business not being able to actually have very attractive pensions in the first place. So it's an interesting debate, I think, also in terms of like kind of like the council workers. Like lots of people assume like everyone is on a huge pension, but actually like many people who work for the council are contracted or subcontracted and are not necessarily on the same employment contract as what we perhaps imagine to be someone employed by the council.
The pensions is one of the reasons that the council started to contract out services, because you could then the people were employed by not directly employed by the council but by other people, and therefore they could offer less attractive pension schemes. I'm not convinced it works, but certainly that was part of the reason why some of that stuff started to happen. And when the Conservatives did the best value thing, making sure that councils did best value analysis of any services that provided internally. One of the measures that was looked at with that was pensions and the long-term impact. And that was and it sort of weighed in the public sector's favour because pensions were so high.
Turns out it's things are hard.
Yeah,
stuff is difficult.
Well, we should have one of the coffee busts and politics in the new year, maybe with someone who's an expert on pensions, because it's something that, yes, it's actually, really complex. And I would love to hear from someone who does this for like a job, for their job, and actually like discuss what are the different options on this topic.
Yeah. Maybe we should get Martin Lewis on.
Yeah, or that Rory Stewart bloke.
It would be great. I think he's more interested in his own podcast, to be fair. But yeah.
Oh, has he got
Rory
a podcast?
Stewart,
Oh, I'd never heard. I didn't realize he had a podcast.
Yeah. I'd recommend it to anybody. By the way, his books are a really, really good read. He's a bit off the wall, is Rory Stewart, but when you read his books, you understand why.
Yeah. Right. Shall we wrap it up there?
Yeah. Well, happy New Year, everyone. We'll see you in Coffee Busts and Politics 2025.
Absolutely, and I'll see both of you tomorrow night.
You will indeed. All right. Take care, everyone.
Cheers all.
See everybody in 2025. Bye.
See you.